The rope was already around her neck when the first shot split the gallows beam in two, then a second, then a third, three shots from three mountains. And the man who read her death sentence was her own father. This is the story of Lenora Whitfield and the three brothers who rode out of the storm to save her. They called it justice when they dragged Lenora Whitfield up 13 wooden steps in the bitter cold of a February dawn. They called it mercy when Judge Edmund Whitfield, her own father, read the sentence with a voice like gravel and ice. And they called it necessary when the rope went around her neck, rough hemp, biting into skin already bruised from 3 days in the town jail. But when three gunshots cracked through the mountain air from three different directions, splintering the gallows beam above her head and scattering the crowd like startled crows, they called it something else entirely: rebellion. And the three men who fired those shots, they called them ghosts, myths, devils. The Colton brothers. The mountain's dark reckoning come down at last. If you are listening from anywhere in the world tonight, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lenora's story travels. And if you stay until the end, you will see why some rescues are not about saving someone. They are about reminding them they were never meant to be broken in the first place. Now, before we go on, if you are new here, hit subscribe. I share new frontier stories every week, and I would love to know where you are listening from tonight. Drop a comment and let me know. Now let us get back to the mountain. The wind off the Rockies cut through Blackstone Ridge like a blade that morning, carrying with it the smell of pine sap, wood smoke, and something darker. Fear dressed up as righteousness. The town square had filled before dawn, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, despite the cold breath misting in the gray light. They came because Judge Whitfield had called them. They came because not coming meant questions, and questions in Blackstone Ridge had a way of turning into accusations. Lenora felt the wood rough beneath her boots as Marshal Kincaid, a thin man with eyes like dirty ice, guided her up the gallows steps. 13 steps. She had counted them the night before from her cell, staring through the barred window at the scaffold silhouetted against the stars. 13 steps between the ground and the platform where her father waited with that rope coiled in his hands like a sleeping snake. Her wrists were bound behind her back with leather straps that had worn grooves into her skin during the walk from the jail. The dress they had given her was thin cotton gray as dishwater, and it did nothing against the mountain cold. But Lenora had long ago stopped expecting warmth from this town, from anyone in it. Lenora Beatrice Whitfield. Her father's voice rolled out over the crowd, steady and certain as a Sunday sermon. He stood at the edge of the platform in his black coat and beaver hat, one hand resting on the gallows post, like it was his personal pulpit. You stand convicted of theft, flight from lawful custody, and moral corruption unbefitting a Christian woman. She almost laughed. Almost. The sound died somewhere in her throat, choked by the cold and the rope Kincaid was lifting toward her neck. Have you anything to say before sentence is carried out? Lenora looked at him then, really looked at Judge Edmund Whitfield, the man who had sired her 24 years ago and spent every year since trying to erase the fact. His face was all hard angles and righteous certainty, pale eyes scanning the crowd to make sure they were watching, that they understood this was law. This was order. This was what happened when you stepped outside the lines he had drawn around this town. She opened her mouth, closed it. What was there to say that would not sound like begging? And she was done begging. Had been done since the night she had finally run, stumbling through 3 feet of snow into the mountains, with nothing but the clothes on her back, in a desperate, bone-deep certainty that freezing to death was better than one more day in that house. Nothing then, her father nodded to Kincaid. Proceed. The rope went around her neck, rough hemp, scratching against skin that had barely healed from the last time someone put their hands on her throat. Kincaid tightened it with practiced efficiency, then stepped back. The crowd had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Judge Whitfield reached for the lever. The first gunshot cracked like lightning, splitting stone, and the beam above Lenora's head exploded in a spray of splinters. Before the echo died, a second shot hit the gallows post 6 inches from Judge Whitfield's hand, sending him stumbling backward. And a third punched clean through the rope mechanism, jamming the trapdoor shut beneath Lenora's feet. 3 shots, 3 directions, 3 hills surrounding the square. Not one man acting alone, but a coordinated strike executed with the precision of men who had planned this moment for a very long time. Someone in the crowd screamed. Kincaid dove for cover behind the stairs, and Judge Whitfield froze, his hands still outstretched. Oh, toward the lever, his face gone white as January ice. Lenora stood there, rope hanging loose around her neck, and turned toward the sound. They came out of the storm like something carved from the mountain itself. Three riders on three dark horses, massive animals whose breaths steamed in the cold air. The Colton brothers. Every soul in Blackstone Ridge knew the name the way they knew the names of storms and seasons, as warning, as ghost story, as the thing mothers invoke to keep children from wandering too far into the high country. Hartley rode at the front, the eldest, the largest, his rifle still smoking across his thighs. He sat easy in the saddle despite the weapon, and his face was all hard edges beneath the brim of a weathered hat. Sharp jaw with 2 days of stubble, straight nose with a slight bump from an old break, and eyes the color of whiskey held up to firelight. Eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. He had lived in these mountains for 6 years, ever since they buried his youngest brother in the frozen ground outside town, and every day of those 6 years had been building toward this exact moment. Cresswell flanked him on the left. Cress they called him, though never to his face unless you wanted to see how fast a man that size could move. He was built like a blacksmith's anvil, all shoulders and barely contained fury, his rifle already aimed at Kincaid with a half-smile that held no warmth whatsoever. Where Hartley was stone, Cress was fire, the kind that burned hot enough to melt iron and did not much care what else caught flame. Ransom held the right side, the youngest of the living brothers, 29 years old, with a face that was softer than his siblings, but eyes of the same amber bloodline. He was the one who looked most like Tobias, the brother they had lost, and he carried that resemblance like both blessing and wound. His rifle was steady, his gaze sweeping the crowd with a quiet anger that was somehow more unsettling than his brother's open rage. "Step away from the woman," Hartley's voice carried across the square, low and rough as gravel underfoot. He did not shout, did not need to. The presence of three men that size, armed and coordinated, and clearly willing to use those weapons, filled the space more completely than any volume could. The judge had recovered his composure, though his hand trembled slightly as he lowered it. "This is a lawful execution, Colton, sanctioned by territorial authority. You have no jurisdiction here. Do not need jurisdiction." Hartley swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion, boots hitting packed snow without a sound. He moved like smoke, like shadow, the rifle now cradled in one arm. Cress and Ransom dismounted in the same breath, the three of them forming a half-moon facing the gallows. "Just need 3 clean shots and a reason." "Got both." Kincaid had reappeared at the edge of the platform, his own rifle raised but shaking. "You fired on an officer of the law. You will hang for it. A lot of men have tried to hang us, Marshal." Hartley's eyes never left Judge Whitfield. Did not take then, will not take now. The crowd had pressed back, creating a wide circle around the gallows. Lenora could see faces she had known all her life, or at least known from the rare glimpses through her attic window. The butcher, the seamstress, the school teacher who had never once questioned why she never saw Judge Whitfield's daughter attend class. They watched with the hungry stillness of people hoping for violence but afraid to be caught wanting it. Judge Whitfield drew himself up, trying to reclaim authority through posture alone. "This is my daughter, Colton. My blood. My responsibility. What happens to her is family business in town law, and you have got no stake in either." "Family business," Hartley said it like he was tasting something rotten. He took 3 steps forward, closing the distance to the gallows. Cress moved parallel, cutting off the retreat path. Ransom stayed back, but his eyes scanned the crowd with the focus of a man cataloging every potential threat. "That what you call it when you lock a girl in an attic for 20 years, when you starve her and beat her and tell the whole town she is simple-minded so nobody asks questions." A ripple went through the crowd. Lenora felt it, the shift, the sudden uncertainty. Cress picked up the thread, his voice harder than his older brother's, sharper. "That what you call it when she finally gets brave enough to run and you put a bounty on her head like she is livestock, when you drag her back here and stage a public hanging to make sure nobody else gets ideas about leaving. She stole from me." The judge's voice cracked on the words. "Took money and supplies. She took what was hers by right." Hartley shifted the rifle slightly. "Food, a coat, $20 from a safe that held 10,000. We checked your house after we found her half frozen in the high country 2 months ago. Saw that attic room," and then Ransom spoke for the first time. His voice was lighter than his brother's, but edged like a blade fresh off the whetstone. I saw the bolt on the outside of the door, the bucket in the corner because you would not let her use a proper privy, the scratch marks on the walls from 20 years of a girl trying to claw her way to freedom. Lenora's throat had closed up. She had not expected this, had not expected anyone to see. To know, to speak it out loud where the whole town could hear. This is not family business, Judge. Hartley took another step. This is murder dressed up in legal paper. And the three of us have had enough of watching you kill people in the name of law and order. Judge Whitfield's face had gone from white to mottled red. You speak of law. You who killed. Careful. The word came out of Hartley's mouth soft as snowfall and twice as cold. Real careful what you say next. The judge's mouth snapped shut. 3 years ago, you hanged Asa Mercer for rustling cattle he never stole. Hartley's voice carried that quiet certainty, the kind that did not need volume to command attention. Man never took a thing in his life. 2 years before that, Nell Kinney for poisoning her husband. Husband who beat her bloody every Saturday night, and everybody knew it. Crest stepped forward, jaw tight, fist clenched at his sides. And 6 years back, you hanged a boy of 19 for a murder he did not commit. Said he killed a mine supervisor over wages. Had witnesses, had evidence, had everything tied up neat as Sunday ribbons. Ransom's voice came last, barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of that square, it queried to every ear. That boy was our brother, Tobias Colton, and the three of us have spent every day since making sure we knew every crooked thing you have done, every lie you have told, every life you have destroyed, so you could keep your grip on this town and the land around it. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Whitfield's face had drained of color again. You have no proof. We have plenty. Hartley smiled, then sharp and cold. Names, dates, land deeds that do not match the claims filed in Denver. Testimony from folks who left this town and got brave enough to talk once they were a few hundred miles clear. He paused, let it settle into the crowd like frost settling into earth. Question is, do you want me to ride into Denver with all that and put it in front of a federal judge? Or do you want to let us walk out of here with one woman and call it even for today? The judge's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Lenora could see the rage trembling through him. The same rage she had seen 1,000 times before, usually right before his fist found her face or his belt found her back. But he could not do anything. Not here. Not with the whole town watching. Take her. The words ground out between clenched teeth. But this is not over, Colton. Never thought it was. Hartley retrieved the boy who had been holding his rifle during the confrontation, a kid maybe 12 years old with eyes wide as dinner plates, and tossed him a silver dollar that the boy caught with shaking hands. Then he looked at Lenora, still standing on that platform with the rope slack around her neck, and something in his expression changed. The hard edges did not soften exactly, but they rearranged themselves into something that might have been recognition. Can you ride? She nodded, did not trust her voice yet. Good, we have got a ways to go before dark. He climbed the gallows steps in 4 long strides, moving past Kincaid like the marshal was furniture, past Judge Whitfield, who had gone rigid with impotent rage, and stopped in front of Lenora. Up close, he was even larger than she had thought, easily 6'5", maybe 6'6", with shoulders that blocked out the gray sky behind him. It is all right, he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. I got you. His hands were gentle when they lifted the rope from her neck. Scarred, weathered hands that looked like they could break stone, moving with surprising delicacy as he loosened the noose and set it aside. Then he pulled a knife from his belt, wicked sharp, the blade catching gray light, and cut the leather strap binding her wrists. Blood rushed back into Lenora's hands. She gasped at the pins and needles burn of it, stumbling slightly. Hartley caught her elbow, steadying her without squeezing, without pulling, just offering a fixed point in this world that had gone liquid around her. Easy, you are all right. She looked up at him, had to tilt her head back because he towered over her by more than a foot, and found those whiskey-colored eyes watching her with something that might have been respect. Not the pitying look the town gave her on those rare occasions she had been allowed outside. Not the disgust she had learned to expect from men who saw her size before they saw her face. Just a steady, level gaze that said, I see you, why the word came out rusty from 3 days of silence in that cell. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Got my reasons. He turned back to guide her down the steps, one hand light on her elbow. Cress and Ransom had positioned themselves at the base, creating a corridor of muscle and intent between Lenore and the crowd. Nobody was willing to meet any of their eyes. 3 horses stood patient as mountain stone. Hartley swung up into the saddle of the largest, a dark mare he called Sable, then reached down. Give me your hand. Lenora hesitated. She was heavy, had always been heavy, would always be heavy, and the thought of him trying to pull her up, of feeling him strain against her weight, of seeing that familiar flicker of disgust cross his face. Ransom appeared beside her. She had not heard him move. His voice was gentle, almost kind, and his amber eyes held none of the judgment she expected. Last week my brother pulled a full-grown elk out of a ravine. You are not going to break him. Come on now. Cress, already mounted on his own horse, snorted from the other side. Both of you quit hovering. She weighs less than the ammunition I haul up the mountain every month. Let us move before that judge finds his spine again. And for a moment, just a moment, something flickered across Lenora's face that had not been there in years. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. The muscle memory of what laughter felt like before it was beaten out of her. She took Hartley's hand. It was warm, calloused, strong. He pulled her up behind the saddle like she weighed nothing at all, settling her against his back with an ease that said he had done this before, lifting heavy things, living things, and carrying them to safety. Hold on, he said. Gets rough once we hit the high trails. Lenora wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through the buckskin. The horse started forward at his knees' pressure, moving from walk to trot to canter as they left the town square behind. Cress rode pointed rifle across his thighs, scanning the trail ahead. Ransom brought up the rear, watching the back trail with those quiet, watchful eyes. The last thing Lenora saw as they rounded the corner onto the mountain road was her father still standing on that gallows platform, watching her disappear into the pines with an expression that promised this was far from finished. Then the trees closed in around them, and Blackstone Ridge fell away below, and there was only the rhythm of hooves on frozen ground, the wind sharp with pine and coming snow, and the steady certainty of the man she was holding on to, like he was the only solid thing left in the world. They rode in silence for the better part of an hour, climbing steadily into the high country where the air thinned and the trees grew thick enough to block the sky. The trail narrowed, became little more than a suggestion between ancient pines. Snow lay deep here, untouched except for animal tracks. Elk, deer, something larger that might have been bear. Hartley spoke first. There is a line shack about 3 miles ahead. We will stop there. Let you warm up. Get some food in you. Why did you do it? Lenore asked. The question had been building since the gallows pressing against her ribs. Why risk yourselves for me? You do not know me. Know enough. He was quiet for a moment, this horse picking its way around a fallen log. You ran. In winter. Most people who want out of Blackstone Ridge wait for spring, plan it careful. You just went. I did not have a choice. There is always a choice. You chose surviving over dying slow in that house. That takes something most folks do not have. Cress called back from ahead without turning. My brother has been planning this for 2 months since we found you on the mountain. But if you ask me, did not need a plan. Seeing that old man rig gallows for his own daughter was reason enough. Ransom from behind quieter. Toby would never have forgiven us if we just stood there and watched. The name Tobias Toby hung in the air between the 3 brothers like an invisible thread connecting them. Lenora felt the weight of it, a shared pain that each carried in his own way. The trail opened up onto a ridge and Lenora caught her breath. The valley spread out below them, endless pine and stone and sky so blue it hurt to look at. In the distance, the peaks of the Rockies stood white against the horizon, ancient and indifferent, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. She had seen this view before, every day for 20 years through a window 12 inches wide. But seeing it through glass and seeing it from the back of a horse with the wind in her face and the smell of pine filling her lungs were 2 different things entirely. One was a painting. This was the world. Besides, Hartley added after a long pause, told you I had my reasons. Your father took our brother from us. Figure the least we can do is take something from him. So I am just revenge. Lenora tried to keep the hurt out of her voice. Failed. No. Hartley said it firm. Certain. like he was setting a fence post into rock. You are a woman who deserves better than a rope in a crooked judge's idea of justice. The revenge is just a bonus. The line shack appeared around the next bend, a small log structure with a stone chimney half buried in snow, but solid. Smoke would not have risen from that chimney in weeks, but the walls were chinked tight and the door hung true on its hinges. Someone maintained this place. Inside it was simple but well kept. A stone fireplace, a rough table, two chairs, a bed frame with rope supports, and a pile of furs that smelled like pine and wood smoke, and something wild. Shelves held supplies, coffee flour, dried meat, a few cans of beans. We keep a few of these scattered through the high country, Hartley explained, kneeling to build a fire. Safer than trying to make it all the way home in one push when weather turns. Crest checked the perimeter outside while Ransom moved to the supplies with the natural ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Within minutes, he had coffee on to boil and was heating dried meat and beans in a battered tin pan. The smell of food, simple food, hot food she had not had to earn through silence or steal in the night, made Lenora's eyes sting. Ransom set a plate in front of her without comment. No flourish, no ceremony. Just food offered freely as if feeding a hungry woman was the most natural thing in the world. Eat, he said gently. No rush. We have got time. She ate, and the beans tasted like the finest meal she had ever had, simply because she could eat them without fear of them being snatched away. The fire built. Warmth pushed back the cold. Crest came in from outside, stomped snow from his boots, and settled into the other chair with his rifle across his knees. He was the easiest of the three to read. Anger burning close to the surface, jaw clenched, every movement deliberate. But his anger was not aimed at her. It was aimed at the world that had allowed what happened to her. How long, Crest asked without looking up from the rifle he was checking. In that attic, since I was 4. His hand stopped on the rifle. Ransom, standing by the fire, turned away, but Lenora saw the muscle in his jaw jump. Hartley, facing the window with his back to the room, said nothing, but his knuckles went white on the window frame. My mother died birthing me. The words came out flat. She had never said them out loud before, not to anyone, not even to herself in the dark of that room. My father said I looked too much like her, said it hurt to see me. So he put me upstairs and told everyone I was simple-minded, that I needed quiet, special care. But you are not simple-minded. Ransom said it not as a question, but as a statement of fact. His amber eyes, so like his brother's, but somehow warmer, met hers with absolute certainty. No, I taught myself to read from the books he brought up. Thought they would keep me quiet. I learned to write, to think, to understand that the life he had given me was not the only life there was. She stared at the flames. When I was 18, I asked if I could come downstairs for Christmas dinner. He broke my nose and did not bring food for 3 days. The sound from outside was Cress. He had stood up, walked out, and from beyond the door came the heavy thud of a fist hitting the tree bark. Once, twice, 3 times. He came back in with bloody knuckles and red eyes and said nothing. Just sat down across from Lenora and put his hand on the table, palm up, an arm offering, an invitation. Lenora placed her hand in his, small, cold, trembling. His hand engulfed hers, calloused, scarred, warm as a hearthstone. He squeezed gently. Nobody touches you like that again. Nobody. A man keeps his word, and I do not make promises I cannot keep. Hartley finally turned from the window. His eyes burned with something Lenora could not name. Not pity, not anger exactly, something heavier. Recognition, maybe. The look of a man who understood what it meant to lose years to someone else's cruelty. How did you finally get out window? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He thought I was too heavy to fit through it. Spent 2 years working at it. Not eating all the food he brought. Moving more. Making myself smaller. Not for him, for me. Because I knew that window was the only way out and I was going to fit through it even if it killed me. 2 years. Ransom said it softly. 2 years of starving and planning, and nobody looked close enough to notice you were getting thinner. Nobody looked at all. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in that cabin. Heavier than the snow on the roof. Heavier than the years. The fire crackled. The wind moaned through the pines. Then Hartley broke it, his voice lower than before, rougher. 2 months ago when we found you on the mountain. You were trying to build a fire and failing. Had not eaten. Could not feel your feet anymore. I remember, you picked me up and I fought you. You thought I was bringing you back, Hartley said. You did not. No, I brought you to our cabin, fed you, let you sleep 16 hours straight. Then you woke up screaming because you thought it was all a dream and you were back in that attic. Ransom set a cup of coffee in Lenore's hands, his fingers brushing hers briefly. His were warm despite the cold. My brother told you that dreams do not serve coffee this bad. Still true, Lenore said and took a sip. It was terrible. Strong enough to strip paint and twice as bitter. She loved it. That night, after Lenore had settled onto the pile of furs and the fire had burned low, she lay in the darkness, listening to the wind and the soft voices of the three brothers who thought she was asleep. Cress spoke first, his voice taut. You planned this for 2 months. You knew the exact day they would hang her. You calculated 3 shots, 3 positions, the precise timing. This was not impulse. Hartley calm as always. No, not impulse. So what is she to us? Living proof a chess piece in your game against the judge, Cress pressed. Or do you actually care about her? A long silence. Then Ransom, gentle as ever, but with steel underneath. She is a person, Cress. Before she is evidence, before she is a weapon, before she is anything else, she is a person. And Toby would say the same. Do not use Toby's name to both. Hartley's voice cut through low and final. Both. She is living proof of what the judge truly is. And she is a woman who deserves better than a rope and a crooked judge's idea of justice. The revenge is a bonus. So if you had to choose, Cress would not let it go. Between saving her and bringing the judge down, if the two things do not run the same direction, silence. Lenore held her breath. Ask me when we get there. And that was all. Lenore lay in the darkness thinking about what she had heard. About attic rooms and gallows, about brothers lost and fathers who destroy, and the different kinds of prisons people build. Was she a weapon or a person? Was she both? And the real question, the one that settled into her chest like an ember, if she was only a weapon, would she care as long as that weapon brought her father down? The answer floating at the edge of sleep, she cared more than she wanted to admit. Because for the first time in her life, someone had lifted a rope from her neck with gentle hands, and she wanted that to mean something more than strategy. But there was another conversation that night. Later, when Cress had fallen into a restless sleep by the door and Ransom was banking the fire, Hartley spoke again, quietly, to Ransom alone. We need to talk about the legal situation. The judge declared her mentally unfit. Under territorial law, she has no independent legal standing. He can send men to take her back anytime. Claims she is his ward. Claims she cannot make decisions for herself. Ransom was quiet for a moment. So what do we do? There is one way to protect her. One legal instrument he cannot override. A marriage certificate. If she is someone's wife, someone with standing, he cannot touch her. Cannot claim guardianship. Cannot drag her back. Ransom stopped tending the fire. You are talking about one of us marrying her. On paper, an arrangement, nothing more than what she agrees to. And who signs? Silence stretched. I will, Hartley said. I am the eldest. I carry the legal weight. You always decide everything. The voice did not belong to Ransom. It came from behind the curtain of furs, clear and steady, despite the rawness in it. Lenora pushed herself upright, and 3 pairs of amber eyes turned toward her in the firelight. I heard all of it, she said. And I will decide, not you. The silence that followed was different from the others that night. Not heavy, startled. 3 large men caught off guard by a woman who'd weighed 130 pounds and had spent 20 years locked in a room. Lenore stepped out from behind the furs, wrapped in a blanket that trailed on the floor behind her. She stood before them, small between their shadows, and there was nothing small about her presence. I agreed to the paper marriage. Hartley signs because he is the eldest, and it makes legal sense. But this is paper, not obligation. I cook, you provide shelter. Nothing beyond that. Those are my terms. Hartley studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. Final. A man keeps his word, he said. And I keep mine. Good. So do I. Lenore turned back toward the bed of furs. And Hartley. Next time you make a plan that involves my life, I sit at the table. Not because you allow it, because I require it. Something flickered across his face, the closest thing to a real smile she had ever seen from him. Understood. She lay down again, pulled the furs up to her chin, and breathed. The leather and pine smell of them was alien and comforting at once. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls. The fire popped, and somewhere far off, a wolf howled its loneliness to the stars. Tomorrow they would ride to the Colton cabin. Tomorrow, the real work of surviving would begin. Tomorrow, she would start learning what it meant to exist in the world beyond that window. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, Lenora Whitfield fell asleep without a bolt on the outside of her door, without fear of morning, without the weight of her father's shadow pressing down on her chest. And in that small log shack high in the Colorado mountains with 3 scarred men keeping watch around a dying fire, something began that none of them had planned for and none of them knew how to name. Something as fragile and stubborn as a wildflower pushing through late winter snow. Something that felt against all reason and all evidence like the beginning of home. The storm broke before dawn, wind screaming down from the peaks and rattling the line shack's shutters like skeletal fingers. Lenora woke to the sound of it, disoriented for a moment, expecting stone walls and that familiar smell of rot and confinement. Instead, she found firelight dancing across log walls, the weight of furs instead of thin blankets, and Hartley still sitting in that chair with his rifle across his knees, though his head had tipped back against the wall in something that might have been sleep. He stirred when she sat up, eyes opening, instantly alert, in that way of men who had learned to sleep light or not at all. Storm is too rough to travel. We will wait it out. Should blow through by midday. They did not reach the Colton cabin until the following evening. 6 hours through drifts that came up to the horse's chest, 3 animals taking turns breaking trail while the riders leaned forward against the wind. Lenora rode behind each brother in rotation, and she discovered that each one was a different world. With Hartley, silence was the conversation. He spoke little, but every word carried weight. He pointed out landmarks with the economy of a man who had lived alone long enough that efficiency had become instinct. A lightning-struck pine marking a good fishing creek. A cluster of rocks where he had once holed up during a 3-day blizzard. The distant peak where Tobias had wanted to stake his mining claim. Cress was fire where Hartley was stone. He talked more opinions, strong anger burning near the surface but never directed at Lenora. He told stories about Tobias with a rough tenderness that surprised her. About the time the boy had spent 3 days carving a chess set for a sick child in town. About his terrible singing voice that he deployed anyway with cheerful abandon. Energy radiated off Cress like heat from a forge intense, almost too much, but Lenora found she was not afraid of him. His anger was something she understood, born from helplessness, from watching someone you loved destroyed and being unable to stop it. Ransom was the one Lenora had not prepared for. The youngest living brother, the one who resembled Tobias most, carried a gentleness she had never received from any man. He was the first to ask if she was cold rather than assume. The one who brought coffee to her hand before she realized she wanted it. The one who noticed when she flinched in her sleep and laid another fur across her shoulders without waking her. The cabin sat in a natural bowl surrounded by pines and protected on 3 sides by sheer rock. It was larger than the line shack, solidly built with a stone foundation and a shake roof. Inside was a revelation that stopped Lenora in the doorway. Bookshelves lined one wall, crammed with volumes on everything from territorial law to natural history. A large table dominated the center of the room, covered with maps and papers and what looked like ledgers. The sleeping area was curtained off for privacy, and a small kitchen area held a real stove, not just a fireplace. Our mother was a school teacher before she married our father. Ransom explained, reading her expression. She made sure all 4 of her boys could read and think. Hartley added a log to the stove. After Tobias died, the books were all we had for company. That first night in the cabin, Lenora could not sleep. She lay behind the curtain they had given her, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house with other people in it. Cress snoring lightly by the door. Ransom's even breathing near the fire. Hartley's occasional movement as he shifted in his chair, still keeping watch, always keeping watch. Sometime in the small hours, she dreamed of the attic, the bolt sliding home, the darkness pressing down. Her father's footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate, each one a countdown to whatever punishment he had decided she deserved that day. She woke screaming, thrashing against the furs, certain the walls were closing in. a presence near the bed, not touching, not crowding, just there. You are all right, Lenora. You are here. There is no bolt on this door. Ransom's voice quiet and steady as a heartbeat. She could make out his shape in the dying firelight, sitting on the floor just outside the curtain. Close enough to hear, far enough to respect. Her breathing slowed. The walls retreated to their proper distance. Ransom handed her a cup of water through the gap in the curtain, and she drank with trembling hands. Then he went back to his bedroll without another word. No questions, no demands, just presence. The next morning, she found something new on her door. A lock. Brass freshly installed, positioned on the inside of the frame. Hartley was at the table, studying maps. He did not look up when she touched. The lock turned it, experimentally felt the bolt slide home under her own fingers. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody needed to. You are home now. The days found their rhythm. Hartley left before dawn most mornings, riding out to meet contacts, carry messages, lay the groundwork for what was coming. Cress split wood in the yard, the steady crack of his axe marking time like a metronome. Ransom cooked, cleaned, tended the horses, and kept the cabin running with the quiet competence of a man who understood that survival was built from 1,000 small daily acts. On the second day, Cress began teaching Lenora to split wood. He was patient in a way that surprised them both, adjusting her grip, showing her how to let the weight of the axe do the work rather than fighting it. Do not wrestle the thing, he told her. Work with it. It is a tool, not a weapon. The weapon is your intent. She failed the first swing, the second, the third. On the fourth, the log split clean, and Cress let out a low whistle. You learn fast. I had a lot of time to study patterns, she said, setting up another log. 20 years of watching through a window teaches you to notice things. On the third day, Ransom took her into the trees to read animal tracks in the snow. Elk, deer, rabbit, fox. He pointed out each print with a teacher's patience, crouching beside her, his amber eyes warm. Who taught you? Lenore asked. Ransom was quiet for 3 steps. Tobias. He could read the mountain like most folks read a book. Knew where every animal would be before it got there. Used to say the land would tell you everything you needed if you just shut up long enough to listen. The name settled between them. Not heavy this time, almost tender. On the 4th day, an ice storm locked them all inside. Hartley sat at the table with his maps. Cress cleaned his rifle. Ransom carved a piece of pine with a small knife, shaping something Lenora could not quite make out. She pulled a book from the shelf, a volume of Thoreau she had never been allowed to finish in the attic, and settled by the fire. Hours passed in comfortable silence. The first comfortable silence of Lenora's life. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of waiting for punishment, but the silence of 4 people existing in the same space, without any of them needing to perform, or protect, or pretend. Winter always ends, Ransom said without looking up from his carving. Lenora was not sure he was talking about the weather. She began to write, everything she could remember in order. 20 years poured onto paper with a borrowed pencil, her hand cramping, the words blurring together as hours bled past. The first memory, at 4 years old, her mother's funeral, her father's blank face. The first time the attic door locked. The years marked only by changing light through a window. Teaching herself to read by candlelight. The escape attempt at 12 that ended with a broken arm and a doctor who believed the lie. The 2 years of deliberate starvation, not to lose weight, but to fit through glass and wood into freedom. Each evening, one of the brothers would read what she had written. Hartley read with a face of granite that slowly, visibly tightened into something colder than anger. When he finished, he set the pages down with the care a man might give to something made of eggshell. He looked at her across the table, and his gaze held a fire she had not seen before. Lenora, I need you to know something. What he did, what he convinced you that you deserved. None of that was truth. You understand me? She nodded. Say it. Say you understand. I understand. Do you? Because I have read what you wrote, and there are still places where you explain his reasoning, where you make excuses for why he might have thought locking you up was necessary. His voice was quiet but immovable. There was no necessity. There was no justification. He imprisoned and abused his own child because she reminded him of a loss he could not face. And instead of dealing with that, like a man, he made you pay for it every day for 20 years. Something cracked open in Lenora's chest. He told me I was difficult. that normal people would not understand, that he was protecting me from a world that would be cruel to someone like me. Someone like you, Hartley repeated. You mean someone who carries more weight than he thinks a woman should? He shook his head. That is not protection. That is control. That is making you believe you are the problem, so you will never question the solution. I know that now. I do. Lenora wrapped her arms around herself. But knowing it and feeling it are different things. Part of me still thinks maybe if I had been prettier, smaller, quieter. Stop. Hartley stood moved to crouch in front of her chair so they were eye level. I am going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. Your father would have found a reason no matter what you looked like, because this was never about you. It was about him, about his grief, his weakness, his need to control something after life took control from him. You survived something that would have broken most people. That takes strength most folks will never have to find in themselves. It was on the 10th day that Lenora found the journal. She was searching the bookshelves for another volume of law when her fingers caught on a leather-bound notebook wedged behind a row of legal texts. She should not have opened it. She knew that even as her thumb found the first page. But her own name written in Hartley's precise hands stopped her cold. Whitfield girl, strongest evidence. Her testimony combined with financial corruption documentation equals sufficient grounds for federal intervention. Must keep her safe until Denver deposition. Caution she may suffer emotional collapse before testimony. Ransom to manage psychological state. Cress on physical protection. I coordinate. She may suffer emotional collapse. Ransom to manage psychological state. Every kindness, every cup of coffee, every gentle word and warm fur and quiet presence outside her curtain during nightmares. All of it calculated assigned. She closed the journal, replaced it exactly as she had found it, and waited. When Hartley returned that afternoon and Cress and Ransom had gone to split wood, Lenora placed the journal on the table between them. Ransom to manage psychological state. That is how you describe your brother bringing me coffee and sitting outside my curtain when I wake up screaming. Hartley's face did not change. He looked at the journal, then at her. You read my journal. You wrote about me like I am evidence. You are evidence. The brutal honesty knocked the air from her lungs. You are also a person. Hartley continued, his voice steady as ever. Those two things do not cancel each other out. I have been planning to bring the judge down for 6 years. When we found you on that mountain, I realized you were the missing piece. Yes, I calculated. Yes, I assigned the roles. But that does not mean Ransom does not genuinely care about you, or that Cress is not genuinely angry on your behalf, or that he stopped, a rare thing, or that you what, or that I felt nothing when I lifted that rope off your neck. Silence, fire crackle, wind howl. My father also said he did everything for me, Lenora said quietly. That locking me away was protection, that everything was for my own good. Hartley went rigid. I am not your father. No, but you decided my life without asking me. Another man who knows what is best for me. The words landed. She saw the hit, a flash of pain through those amber eyes quick enough that most people would have missed it. But Lenora had spent 20 years reading micro-expressions through a window. She caught everything. You are right, Hartley said after a long silence. I should have asked. Should have been straight with you from the beginning. Then be straight now. What am I to you? You are the bravest woman I have ever met. You are living proof of the worst crime the judge ever committed. You are the reason I believe 6 years of waiting was not wasted. He paused. And you are the first person who has made this cabin feel less like a hiding place and more like a home. I do not know what to do with that last part. Lenora studied him for a long time. Then she set the journal down. Do not write about me like evidence anymore. If you want to know whether I am all right, ask me. Not Ransom, done. And Hartley, next time I sit at the table. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a real smile. Understood. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness implies a wrong fully processed, and this was rawer than that. But a recalibration, a new understanding that whatever they were building here, whether it was justice or family or something, none of them had a word for yet it would be built as equals or not at all. 3 days later, old Jules arrived with the news that changed everything. The grizzled trapper warmed his hands by the fire and laid out the situation with the economy of a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. Word was spreading, people were talking, some interested, some scared, some ready to ride down to Blackstone Ridge tomorrow if given the word. But there were complications. Judge Whitfield had put out new paper on all of them. $500 for each Colton brother, dead or alive. $1,000 for Lenora, alive only. He was also claiming she was deranged, that she needed medical care, that Hartley had taken advantage of her condition, making himself out to be the concerned father trying to save his poor sick child. Made the territorial papers, Jules said, pulling out a folded newspaper. You are famous. The article was exactly what Jules described. Judge Edmund Whitfield, respected pillar of the community, pleading for the safe return of his mentally unwell daughter, kidnapped by dangerous criminals with a known vendetta. No mention of the gallows, no mention of 20 years in an attic. He is good, Lenora said, voice bitter. I will give him that. He has had practice, Hartley countered. Did the same thing after Tobias was arrested, and there was more. A posse was forming, 20 men, maybe more, led by Marshal Kincaid, planning to sweep the high country and flush them out. After Jules left, Hartley spent an hour checking weapons and securing defenses. Crest loaded shells into every rifle in the cabin with practiced efficiency. Ransom quietly packed emergency supplies into saddlebags. Then the bounty hunters found them. The first shot cracked through the afternoon air while Crest was teaching Lenora to shoot at targets behind the cabin. Wood exploded 6 inches from his head. He moved instantly, grabbing Lenora and hauling her behind a boulder as 2 more shots followed, kicking up snow where they had been standing. Inside. Now. They ran low, zigzagging across the clearing. More shots followed, close enough that Lenora could hear the buzz of lead passing her ear. They crashed through the cabin door, and Hartley slammed it shut, dropping the heavy bar into place. How many? Hartley was already at the window, rifle up. At least 4, professional by the spacing. The siege settled into a tense standoff that lasted through the night. The bounty hunters held the high ground in the rocks above, but Hartley had built well. The cabin walls were thick, the windows positioned to cover every approach. At some point in the darkness, Lenora said the thing none of them wanted to hear. We cannot hold here forever. When Kincaid's 20 men arrive, 4 shooters will become 24, and ammunition runs out. She is right, Ransom said from his position by the east window. So I am not staying, Lenora continued, and neither are you. But running across open ground with them in the rocks is suicide, unless we do not actually run. All 3 brothers looked at her. There is a crevice in the north wall, narrow, barely big enough to squeeze through. It leads to a ravine that connects to the main trail about a mile down. Lenora looked at Hartley. You built this cabin. You know that crevice. You left it there as an emergency exit. Hartley studied her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. The look of a man who had expected one thing and found another entirely. It is tight, he said, very tight. I squeezed through an attic window. I know how to work with tight spaces. They built the deception in an hour. Ropes tied to the door and shutters run through a pulley system so that from outside it would look like movement inside. Flammable materials stacked near the east window. Fire would draw the hunters. The rigging would create noise. And while they focused on the wrong exit, 4 people would slip through stone. Dawn. Hartley lit the fire, pulled the ropes to slam the door open, and they went out the back where the crevice waited like a dark mouth in the rock. It was tighter than Lenora had feared. She had to turn sideways, exhale completely, and force herself through stone that scraped her shoulders and back. And suddenly, she was somewhere else entirely. 20 years earlier, the attic window. The same motion, the same feeling of wood and stone pressing against bone. Glass cutting her sides as she pushed through. But this time, at the other end, 3 men waited. Not captors, not wardens. Something else. Something she was still learning the name of. They ran the ravine in gray morning light, slipping on ice and loose rock branches, whipping at their faces. Behind them came the sound of angry voices as the bounty hunters discovered the empty cabin and the trick. But Hartley knew these mountains the way a man knows his own hands, and he led them through a maze of rock and timber that would have been impossible to track without intimate knowledge of every trail, every game path, every hidden traverse. By midday, they had lost their pursuers. But the cabin was gone. The books, the maps, the careful documentation of 6 years, all of it left behind or taken by men who would deliver it to the judge. The hidden compartment, Hartley said, reading the worry on Lenore's face. Under the floorboard, bounty hunters look for money and weapons, not evidence of judicial corruption. They move through the high country like ghosts after that, never staying in one place more than a single night. And it was during those hard, cold days of running that Lenore made her decision. They were sitting around a small fire in a line shack near the town, close enough to see Blackstone Ridge's chimney smoke in the valley below when she said it. "We are not going to Denver. Not yet." Cress looked at her across the fire. The plan was always Denver, federal court. That was Hartley's plan. Mine is different. Lenora sat straight at her. My father controls that town through fear, through making people believe that crossing him means losing everything. But fear only works when people feel isolated, when they think they are the only one who sees the corruption. You want to organize them, Hartley said. I want to show them they are not alone, that there are enough of us that if we stand together, he cannot touch all of us. Her voice was gaining strength. I am not talking about violence. I am talking about truth. Public truth, the kind that cannot be buried or bought off because too many people witness it. That is dangerous, Cress said. He has armed men. I spent 20 years in that attic because dangerous was better than safe, when safe meant staying silent. Lenore's hands had curled into fists. I am tired of running, tired of hiding. If he wants a fight, let us give him one. Hartley looked at her, looked at the woman who 6 weeks ago could barely stand on gallows without trembling, and now sat before 3 armed mountain men proposing a plan that required more courage than most people found in a lifetime. He remembered her words, the ones that had changed everything between them. Next time you make a plan that involves my life, I sit at the table. She was at the table now. And her plan was better than his. All right, he said, we do it your way, but we plan it smart, no rushing in blind. And so the real work began. Messages went out through the mountain network, our work. Trappers carried letters to scattered survivors, and the date was set. 2 weeks from today, Blackstone Ridge, noon. The town square where Lenore had nearly died. But 10 days before the confrontation, as they traveled through a narrow canyon to meet the first group of returning witnesses, gunfire erupted from the rocks above. Not bounty hunters this time. The judge's own men. 5 of them well-armed, positioned at exact points along the only route. Someone in their network had leaked the information. The first bullet hit Cress in the shoulder. He fell from his horse and rolled into the snow, blood steaming hot and red against the white. Hartley returned fire from the saddle with deadly accuracy. Ransom leaped down and dragged his brother behind, covered his hands already slick with blood. Lenore on the 3rd horse remembered everything Cress had taught her. Breathe, aim, see, squeeze. Her first shot forced a gunman to duck. Her second drove another back behind his rock. She did not have the skill of the Colton brothers, but she had 20 years of patience and a capacity for focus that only someone who had lived in a single room could develop. The ambush broke after 10 minutes. 2 of the judge's men wounded, 3 fleeing. But Cress was losing blood, and the question hung heavier than the gun smoke. Who betrayed them? Lenore's trap found the answer. She had proposed giving each contact group different information about their next meeting location. When the judge's men appeared at the site, only old Jules knew about the answer was clear. Jewel confessed at Monroe's trading post, whiskey shaking in his hands. The judge had taken his granddaughter, locked her upstairs. Lenore felt ice spread through her body. Upstairs, the attic. Her father had imprisoned another child to control another man. The same pattern, the same prison. Different prisoner. We rescue the girl, Lenore said. Before the confrontation. Not after. That is not the plan Hartley began. The plan just changed. Lenore met his eyes, and he saw in them something that ended the argument before it started. I will not stand in that square and tell my story while a child is living her own version of it, right above our heads. Hartley looked at her. Then he nodded. Ransom tonight. You and Lenore go up. Cress and I create the distraction. The night before the confrontation, Lenore and Ransom climbed the roof of the judge's house in darkness, approaching the same attic window Lenore had squeezed through to escape 2 months ago. The circle closing. Inside the room was unchanged. Same 4 walls, same bolt on the outside of the door, same bucket in the corner. And on the narrow bed, a girl of about 8 years old curled in exhausted sleep, tear tracks dried on her cheeks. Lenora knelt beside the bed and felt 20 years crash into her at once. Every night she had lain on this same mattress. Every morning she had checked whether the door was locked. Every year she had looked through this window and dreamed of a world she was not allowed to touch. Ransom's hand on her shoulder. Gentle. Grounding. Lenora, the girl needs you now. She wiped her eyes, touched the child's arm. My name is Lenora. I used to live in this room, and I have come to take you out. The girl's eyes opened. Wide, frightened, wild. The judge said nobody would come. The judge lies. Everyone lies, but I do not. Lenora held out her hand. Come with me. Small fingers found hers, cold, trembling. Lenora lifted the child to the window where Ransom waited, and he took the girl with the care of a man handling something infinitely precious. Below in the streets of Blackstone, Ridge Crest was setting off homemade fireworks from 3 positions, one arm drawing every eye in the wrong direction. Hartley waited at the bottom of the hill with horses. When Lenora Ransom and the child arrived, he looked at the girl, and his granite face did something Lenora had never seen before. It broke, just for a second, just long enough to show that beneath the stone was a man who remembered another child, another injustice, another life stolen by a judge who used law as a weapon. Then the granite returned, but Lenora had seen. And she understood that Hartley Colton, the man who had written about her as evidence, who had planned for 6 years with logic and strategy, and cold calculation, was also a man who could be shattered by the sight of a child locked in a room. Winter always ends, Ransom whispered to the girl as they rode away from that house. And yours just did. The girl was safe, delivered to a trusted family outside of town before first light. Old Jules disappeared into the night, carrying shame and gratitude in equal measure. And as dawn began to color the peaks of the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold, Lenora Whitfield looked down at Blackstone Ridge from the ridge where they had stopped to rest the horses. The town square was visible from here, the gallows still standing, waiting. Tomorrow she would walk into that square. No gun, no weapon of any kind, nothing but the truth and the hope that truth would be enough. She was not sure it would be. She had lived 24 years in a world where truth meant nothing and power meant everything. But she was done living in that world, done hiding, done running, done being the girl in the attic. You ready for this? Hartley asked beside her. Are you? No. But I am going anyway. Lenora looked at Cress, his wounded arm in a sling jaw, set with the particular stubbornness of a man who would fight one-handed before he would stand down. She looked at Ransom, whose gentle eyes had gone steady and hard in the way of still water hiding deep currents. She looked at Hartley, whose silence spoke more than most men's speeches. Then let us go give him the fight he has been asking for, she said, and let us finish it. Morning came cold and clear, the kind of day where sound carries for miles and everything feels sharp-edged and possible. Lenora, dressed in borrowed frontier clothes, buckskin and wool practical, and warm clothes made for surviving rather than impressing. But at her throat, she pinned the cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother. The only thing from her old life she had carried through the attic window, through the snow, through all of it. A small oval of carved ivory on a navy ribbon warm against her collarbone. She had never known the woman whose silhouette was carved into that stone. But she wore her face. Her father had told her that every day for 20 years like an accusation. Today it would be something else. Today it would be armor. Dorothea Kinney's mercantile sat on a side street, deliberately away from the square's immediate visibility. They entered through the back, one at a time in the gray light before the town fully woke. Dorothea was waiting them, a thin woman with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much grief and swallowed it whole rather than let it slow her down. You made it, she said. Your friend is upstairs already. Hartley had arrived first, as he always did. When Lenora climbed the narrow staircase and found him in the cramped storage room above the shop, the tension left his shoulders by a degree she had learned to measure. Not relief exactly. Hartley did not do relief, but something close. How many, he asked Dorothea. 17 arrived so far, scattered around town, staying low until noon. A few more might still be coming. She set bread and coffee on a crate. The territorial marshal is still here too. A man named Garrett. He has been asking questions, making Judge Whitfield nervous. That is good. Nervous people make mistakes, or they lash out. Dorothea looked between them. You understand what you are walking into. Edmund Whitfield is not going to stand there and let you destroy him. He will have men positioned, plans in place. We are counting on it, Hartley said. The more he reacts, the more he shows his true nature. Cress and Ransom arrived within minutes of each other. Cress moved stiffly, his wounded shoulder bound tight under his coat, but his jaw was set with the particular stubbornness of a man who would bleed out on his feet before he would sit down. Ransom was quieter than usual, which for Ransom meant nearly silent, his amber eyes carrying a weight that had settled there during the night and had not lifted. Hartley reached for his rifle, checked it one final time, then set it against the wall. No guns. We do this with words or not at all. Cress stared at him. You have lost your mind. Lenora stepped forward. The moment we carry weapons, we are the aggressors, and he is the victim defending his town. We go out there as citizens seeking justice, not outlaws seeking revenge. That distinction matters. Actions, not words. Ransom said softly, unbuckling his gun belt. He laid it on the crate beside Hartley's rifle. Then he looked at Cress. Toby would have gone without a gun. You know that. Something moved behind Cress's eyes. Pain and memory, and the particular anguish of a man being asked to fight against every instinct bred into his bones. He cursed under his breath. Then he pulled his pistol from its holster and set it down with a deliberateness that said he was not happy about it, but he was doing it anyway. If we die because of this, I am haunting all three of you, noted, Hartley said. Lenore looked at the three of them, three large men in a small room, unarmed by choice, about to walk into a square where armed men waited. They were doing this for Tobias, for Nell and Asa, and every other name carved into the judge's ledger of cruelty. But they were also doing it for her, because she had asked, because she had sat at the table and changed the plan, and they had listened. Stronger together than apart, she said. Hartley met her eyes, nodded once, the nod that carried the weight of 6 years. They descended the stairs and emerged onto the street. The square was visible from here, already filling with people. 200 at least, maybe more. Word had spread further than any of them had expected. People had come from neighboring towns, from ranches and mining camps, and homesteads scattered across the territory, drawn by rumor and curiosity and something deeper. A hunger for truth that had been suppressed too long. Lenora walked toward the square with Hartley on her left, Cress on her right, and Ransom behind. 4 people moving through the morning light with the steady pace of those who had already made their peace with what was coming. The crowd noticed. Conversation died in ripples spreading outward from their approach. People turned, stared, whispered. Lenora refused to lower her gaze. She had spent 20 years invisible. Today she would be seen. Judge Whitfield was on his courthouse porch, flanked by Marshal Kincaid and 4 armed men Lenora did not recognize. The judge wore his black coat and beaver hat, the image of judicial authority carefully maintained. But even from this distance, she could see the tension in his posture. A man gripping the edges of his own power and feeling them crumble. He saw her, went rigid, said something sharp to Kincaid, who immediately moved down the porch steps, hand on his pistol. That is far enough, Kincaid called. Hartley Colton, you are wanted for kidnapping and assault Lenora Whitfield. There is a warrant for your arrest. Both of you need to come peaceful. We are peaceful, Hartley said, his voice carrying across the square with the ease of a man accustomed to speaking across mountain distances. We are here to speak truth. If that is a crime in Blackstone Ridge now, then arrest us. Do it in front of all these witnesses. Let them see how justice works in this town. The territorial marshal had moved closer, a tall man with a drooping mustache and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Garrett. He stood near the courthouse steps with a folder of papers under his arm, watching the confrontation with the calculating patience of a man measuring what he was seeing against what he had been told. Kincaid hesitated. The crowd was growing, people pressing in from side streets. 300 now. Too many to control easily. Judge Whitfield stepped to the edge of his porch. And there it was. The voice Lenora had heard every day for 20 years. The voice that had told her she was broken, defective, unworthy of sunlight. Now pitched to carry smooth as honey, warm with manufactured concern. Lenora, sweetheart, you are not well. This man has confused you, turned you against your own family. Please come home. We will get you the help you need, even now, even here. Even standing in the public square before 300 witnesses, he was trying to paint her as the broken one, the damaged daughter who could not be trusted, the mad woman deceived by mountain criminals. Lenora felt rage bloom in her chest, white-hot and clarifying. And underneath the rage, something harder, something that had been forged in 20 years of darkness and silence, and a patience so deep it had become geological. She opened her mouth, and her voice did not shake. My name is Lenora Whitfield. I am 24 years old, and I am not now, nor have I ever been mentally unwell. The crowd shifted. Uncertain murmurs rippled through it like wind through tall grass. I was 4 years old when my father locked me in the attic of his house. 4 years old when he told this town I was simple-minded, that I needed isolation and special care. I spent the next 20 years in that room, seeing sunlight only through a window, eating whatever scraps he remembered to bring me, existing only as a secret shame he kept hidden from the world. Judge Whitfield's face had gone the color of old bone. That is not. She is delusional. You can see she is not in her right mind. I taught myself to read from the books he brought, thinking they would keep me quiet. Lenora raised her voice over his, and the crowd leaned in, and the square went still enough to hear the wind in the pines beyond the last building. I learned about the world from that attic window. Watched seasons change, and people lived their lives while I was locked away for the crime of being born to a man who could not face his own grief. She took a step forward. The crowd parted. When I was 18, I asked if I could come downstairs for Christmas dinner. He broke my nose and did not bring food for 3 days. When I was 21, I tried to escape through the window. He caught me on the stairs, broke my arm, and told the doctor I had fallen in my condition. The doctor believed him. Everyone believed him. Because why would Judge Edmund Whitfield, pillar of this community, lie about his own daughter another step? She was in the center of the square now, the gallows looming behind her like a monument to her father's particular vision of justice. 2 months ago, I finally got thin enough, desperate enough, brave enough to squeeze through that window. I ran into the mountains with nothing, choosing to freeze to death rather than spend one more day in that attic. The Colton brothers found me and saved my life. And when my father could not control me anymore, could not keep me silent, he did what he always does. He used the law to destroy me, put me on trial, convicted me of crimes I did not commit, and brought me here to the scaffold to hang. The square was silent, 300 people holding their breath. And in that silence, one by one, they stepped forward. Ezekiel Mercer came first, an older man with burned scars on his hands and a voice damaged by smoke or screaming or both. I am Ezekiel Mercer. My son Asa was with me the night those cattle were supposedly stolen. But this man had witnesses who said otherwise. Witnesses whose gambling debts disappeared the week after they testified. Winifred Brennan followed. A young woman holding a baby on her hip, her face set with the particular courage of someone who has nothing left to lose. 2 years ago, Judge Whitfield convicted my husband of claim jumping. Our claim was legal, properly filed, but the judge said the paperwork was forged and gave our land to the mining company he holds shares in. My husband died in territorial prison 6 months later. One by one, they came forward. 17 people with 17 stories. Corruption and cruelty, lives destroyed and justice perverted. A rancher whose land was seized through fabricated liens. A widow whose husband was sentenced to hard labor for a debt he had already paid. A former deputy who had been run out of town for asking too many questions about evidence that did not add up. The crowd listened with growing horror. The veil of respectability being stripped away, stitch by stitch, to reveal the rot underneath. Marshall Garrett stepped into the center of the square, his folder open, his voice cutting through the aftermath like a blade through rope. I have spent 2 weeks investigating claims of judicial misconduct in this town. What I found is a pattern of convictions based on manufactured evidence, witness testimony obtained through coercion and bribery, and land transfers that violate territorial law. He looked directly at the judge. I have sworn affidavits from 11 former residents of Blackstone Ridge, bank records showing payments to witnesses who later testified in capital cases, land deeds that do not match the surveys filed in Denver. Judge Edmund Whitfield, you are under arrest on federal charges of corruption, conspiracy, and abuse of judicial authority. And after hearing Miss Whitfield's testimony, I am adding charges of unlawful imprisonment and child abuse. Judge Whitfield had backed up against his porch railing. His face was a map of everything Lenore had ever feared and everything she had finally outgrown. Rage and disbelief in the desperate calculation of a man watching his world collapse and searching for any lever that might stop it. You cannot arrest me. I am a territorial judge. You do not have the authority. Federal authority supersedes territorial in cases of corruption. Garrett pulled out handcuffs. You have the right to... The gunshot cracked like thunder in a clear sky. For a moment, Lenore did not understand what had happened. Then she saw Garrett stumble, clutching his shoulder where blood was spreading dark across his coat. The crowd screamed, scattering in panic. And Judge Whitfield was holding a pistol pulled from inside his coat, smoke still curling from its barrel. Nobody arrests me in my own town. His voice was shaking, but the gun was not. Nobody takes what is mine. He swung the pistol toward Lenora. Three men moved without thinking. Hartley put himself directly between the gun and Lenora, his broad back blocking her entirely. Cress stepped to the left, one arm shielding her flank. Ransom closed the right side. A wall of bone and muscle and 6 years of fury standing between a gun and the woman they had pulled from a gallows 6 weeks ago. Do not do this, Judge Hartley said. You are only making it worse. Worse, the laugh that came from the judge was high and brittle, the sound of a mind that had held itself together through discipline and cruelty for decades and was now watching both dissolve. How could it possibly be worse? You have already destroyed everything. My reputation, my authority, my... His eyes found Lenora over Hartley's shoulder. You ungrateful wretch, after everything I did for you, keeping you safe, keeping you fed, protecting you from a world that would have devoured you. You kept me in a cage, Lenora said, and her voice was steady. Steady as the mountain behind her, you made me believe I was worthless, that I deserved isolation and pain. You turned your own grief into my prison sentence. Then she did the thing that none of them expected. She stepped around Hartley. He reached for her arm. Cress grabbed at her sleeve. Ransom whispered her name like a prayer. She moved past all three of them and stood in the open, 5 feet from her father, the pistol aimed at her chest. Your mother died because of you. The words exploded out of him, raw and jagged, and dripping with 24 years of unprocessed grief. She died bringing you into this world. And every time I looked at you, I saw her, saw what I lost, and I could not bear it. So you made me bear it instead. Lenora did not step back, did not flinch. You made a 4-year-old child pay for your loss every day for 20 years. And when people tried to stand up to you, Tobias Colton, Asa Mercer, Nell Kinney, you destroyed them too. Judge Whitfield's hand was shaking now, the pistol wavering. Behind him, Kincaid had his own gun drawn but looked paralyzed, caught between his badge and his breaking point. I was protecting this town, the judge said. Maintaining order. Someone has to make the hard choices. You were maintaining power, Hartley said from behind Lenora. There is a difference. Order built on fear and corruption is not order. It is tyranny. My brother Tobias died because he saw through it, and you killed him for it. The judge swung the pistol toward Hartley, then back to Lenora, then toward the crowd that had not fled but pressed closer, watching with the terrible fascination of people who understood that what happened in the next 30 seconds would determine what their town became. You want to shoot someone, Lenora said. Shoot me, your daughter, the child you locked away and tried to erase. Pull that trigger in front of all these witnesses and prove exactly what you are. The gun wavered. For a moment, something flickered across Edmund Whitfield's face. Grief, maybe. The ghost of the man he had been before loss twisted him into this. A young father holding a newborn daughter in a room where his wife's body had not yet gone cold. A moment of love so pure and so immediately poisoned by anguish that it curdled into something monstrous. Then the mask hardened again. You think I will not, Edgar? Kincaid's voice. Quiet, firm, the voice of a man who had finally found the line he would not cross. Put the gun down. Stay out of this, Marshal. I cannot. Not anymore. Kincaid moved closer, his own pistol drawn but pointed at the ground. I have stood by a lot of things I should not have. Looked the other way when my gut told me something was wrong. But I will not watch you shoot an unarmed woman in cold blood. I will not be part of that. Other voices joined. Ezekiel Mercer, it is over, Judge. Winifred Brennan, let it end. Dorothea Kinney stepping out of her mercantile into the square, her voice carrying the weight of her dead sister's name. For Nell, for all of them, let it end. The gun trembled violently. Sweat broke on the judge's forehead despite the cold. He looked around the square, seeing the faces of people who had once feared him, respected him, obeyed him without question. Now they looked back with something worse than anger. Pity. His arm dropped. The pistol hung loose at his side. The fight left him all at once like a fire that had finally consumed its last fuel, and what remained was his ash. He looked old suddenly, diminished, a small man in a coat too heavy for him to carry anymore. Kincaid moved quickly, took the pistol, secured the judge's hands behind his back with the practiced motion of a man performing the arrest he should have made years ago. And as Kincaid led him past Lenora, the judge stopped. Looked at his daughter with eyes that held something Lenora had never seen in them before. Not rage, not contempt, not the cold calculation of control. Something older and more terrible. I did love you, he said, so quiet that only she could hear. When you were born, before your mother died, I did love you. Lenore looked at this broken man who had broken her in return, who had taken his grief and built it into walls and locked his daughter behind them, because looking at her face meant looking at everything he had lost. That makes it worse, she said. Not better. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer, and he let Kincaid lead him away toward the jail. The square did not erupt so much as exhale. 20 years of held breath released at once. People talking, crying, embracing. The 17 who had come forward, surrounded by others sharing stories they had been too afraid to voice. It was not celebration. Too much pain had been uncovered for that, but it was release. Like a wound that had been festering for years finally lanced. Lenora stood in the center of it all and felt the strangest sensation. Not triumph, not even relief, just emptiness. A vast quiet space where rage and fear had lived for so long that their absence felt like a missing limb. Then a hand found hers, warm, calloused, steady, Hartley, standing beside her without speaking because Hartley never spoke when presence was enough. She squeezed his hand and he squeezed back. Cress appeared on her other side, his good arm hanging loose, his face holding an expression she had never seen on him before. Something softer than anger, something that might have been awe. She actually did it, he said almost to himself. She stood in front of that gun. Ransom came last, his eyes bright with tears he did not bother to hide because Ransom never hid what he felt. Toby would have liked you, he said. He always said the most interesting people were the ones who could not be categorized. Hartley looked down at Lenore and smiled. A real smile for the first time since she had known him, a smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face from stone into something warm and human and alive. She belongs here, he said quietly, right where she is supposed to be. The Territorial Marshal's Office sent 2 deputies to escort Judge Whitfield to Denver for trial. The town watched him loaded into a wagon, hands cuffed, and the silence that followed was heavy with complicated grief. 3 weeks later, word came back. 47 charges: corruption, bribery, unlawful imprisonment, child abuse, attempted murder of a federal officer. 30 years in the Territorial Penitentiary at Cannon City. At 53, it was a life sentence. Lenora heard the news sitting on the porch of the Colton cabin, the cabin they had returned to and repaired after the bounty hunter's damage, and felt the weight lift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily like snow melting from a roof in the first warm days of spring. Her father could not hurt her anymore, could not hurt anyone. For the first time in her life, his shadow did not fall across her future. She burned the pages of her testimony that night. Not to forget, she would never forget, but because she no longer needed to carry the weight of proof. Justice had been done, the truth had been told, and the paper could become ash and smoke and rise up through the chimney into the mountain night. Hartley stood beside her, his hand warm in hers, and neither of them spoke. There was nothing that needed saying. Spring came, the snow retreated up the peaks. The valley turned green in a way that made Lenora's chest hurt with beauty she was still learning to absorb. She planted a garden beside the cabin, tomatoes, beans, herbs. The first time in her life, she had put seeds into earth and waited for them to grow. Hartley built a fence around it without being asked. Cress hauled topsoil in a cart he had built from scraps. Ransom brought wildflower seeds from a meadow 2 ridges over and scattered them along the porch rail. "One flower for every year you deserve to live outdoors," he said. "Built with our own hands," Lenora whispered, watching green shoots push through dark soil. All of this, summer deepened. Lenora read every book on the Colton shelves and wrote letters to Marshall Garrett requesting copies of legal documents. She began studying law in earnest, drafting ideas for reform, marking passages in territorial statutes with a pencil that Hartley kept sharp for her without being asked. Blackstone Ridge changed around them. The gallows was torn down and replaced with a small park. A plaque was mounted bearing the names of Tobias Colton, Nell Kinney, Asa Mercer, and 13 others. The town elected a new council. Dorothea Kinney expanded her mercantile into a meeting hall. Kincaid resigned and left the territory carrying his complicity like a stone in his chest. And in the cabin on the mountain, 4 people found a rhythm. Hartley guided hunting expeditions for wealthy visitors from Denver, gone for weeks, but always returning. Cress discovered an unexpected peace in cattle ranching. His fierce energy finally channeled into something that built rather than destroyed. Ransom carved wood with hands that remembered what Tobias had taught him, each piece carrying the spirit of a brother who would never grow old. The paper marriage to Hartley stopped being paper somewhere during the second winter. There was no dramatic moment, no grand declaration. Just an evening by the fire, 4 cups of terrible coffee on the table, and the quiet realization that this was home. Lenore looked at Hartley reading by firelight and saw not a strategist or a protector or a man who had once written about her as evidence, but a man who had placed a lock on the inside of her door so she would never again wonder whether she was free. She looked at Cress cleaning his rifle with the meditative focus he brought to everything. His shoulders relaxed for the first time in 6 years. She looked at Ransom carving a small wooden elephant for the girl they had rescued from the attic, a girl now safe with a new family, and his hands moved with the same gentle precision he brought to everything he touched. "You are home now," Ransom said without looking up, as if he had read her thoughts. "Always." 3 years later, Denver. Lenora passed the territorial bar examination at 27, one of a handful of women practicing law in Colorado Territory. Josephine Phelps, the sharp-minded attorney who had taken her on as a clerk, watched from the gallery. "You understand corruption from the inside," Phelps had told her on their first meeting. "That is valuable. But you also understand what it costs the people at the bottom. That is priceless." The day Lenora won her first case defending a woman wrongfully accused of theft by an employer who had been stealing her wages, she walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight and found 3 men waiting on the steps. Hartley nodded. Short, certain. A nod that carried the weight of everything they had survived and everything they had built from the wreckage. Cress whistled low and long, the sound of a man impressed despite himself. Ransom wept openly because Ransom always wept when something mattered, and he had never once been ashamed of it. "Toby would be proud," Ransom said. "He always said real freedom is choosing who you become." 10 years passed, the cabin grew. New rooms added for 3 children they fostered and then adopted, orphans and cast-offs, children who needed a family as much as 4 broken people needed purpose. The ranch expanded. The bookshelves multiplied. 20 years after a February morning, when 3 gunshots shattered a gallows beam and changed the course of 5 lives forever, Lenora sat on the porch of a house that had started as a cabin and become a home. Her hair showed silver at the temples, though her cornflower blue eyes had lost none of their sharpness. Hartley sat beside her, his hair gone salt and pepper, still tall, still steady, his calloused hand resting on hers the way it had every evening for 2 decades. In the yard below, Cress was teaching a grandchild to ride a horse, his voice carrying up the hill with a warmth that would have astonished the angry young man who had once punched pine trees until his knuckles bled. On the opposite end of the porch, Ransom carved a figure from pale wood telling stories about Tobias to a circle of wide-eyed children who knew their lost uncle only through the legend their family had built around his memory. The oldest granddaughter ran up the steps. "Grandmother Lenora." "Where did you live when you were little?" Lenora looked out at the Rockies, the same peaks she had watched from a 12-inch window for 20 years. The same sky, the same stone, the same ancient, indifferent beauty that had once been a painting behind glass and was now the world she walked through every day. "I lived in a very small place," she said. very dark. But I got out, and I found this mountain and three good men and a life I never dared to dream. Were you happy? Lenora looked at Hartley, who smiled. Small, quiet, the way he did everything, but his eyes said all of it. She looked at Crest below, laughing with grandchildren he would have died to protect. She looked at Ransom, whose carving hands still moved with the gentle precision of a man who believed that beautiful things were worth the time they took. I am happy, she said. We built this with our own hands, all of us, stronger together than apart. That night, 4 cups of coffee sat on the porch railing. Still terrible. Ransom brewed it because Hartley's was worse, and Cress had been banned from the kitchen after an incident with a Dutch oven that the family still argued about at holidays. 4 chairs, 4 people who had fought and bled and lost and found each other in the wreckage of other people's cruelty. The stars came out. The same stars Lenora had watched from the attic window every night for 20 years, dreaming of freedom, while the bolt held fast on the other side of the door. The girl in that attic, Lenora said softly, would never have believed this life was possible. That girl survived 20 years, so you could sit here, Hartley said. That is worth everything. Built with our own hands, Ransom whispered. Stronger together, Cress added, and his voice was rough, but his eyes were soft. Lenora breathed the mountain air, cold and clean and full of pine. She let it fill her completely, the way she had learned to fill her lungs with freedom after 20 years of breathing only fear. Winter always ends, she said, and ours ended a long time ago. The fire crackled inside the house. The wind carried pine and the sound of a creek running somewhere in the darkness. Stars turned overhead, slow and ancient, indifferent to the small, warm lives burning below them. And on the porch of a house built by 4 pairs of hands on a mountain that had tested them and held them and finally given them peace, Lenora Whitfield closed her eyes and let the silence settle around her like a blanket. Not the silence of an attic, not the silence of fear. The silence of a woman who had found her voice, used it to shatter a tyrant, and then set it down gently beside a fire surrounded by the people she loved, in a home she had built from nothing but courage, and the stubborn refusal to believe that the life she had been given was the only life there was. Free. At last. Completely. Home.